Yeah, well, there are a number of people inside Zimbabwe who can't afford, because, as you know, 95% of Zimbabweans are unemployed. And most of them are dependent on either food aid from NGOs or from their relatives in the diaspora who send money back home. Now, most of those people can't afford to buy a newspaper. I mean, that's a dollar, a US dollar is more than a loaf of bread in Zimbabwe. They'd rather buy a loaf of bread than buy a newspaper.
I mean, it's important what you said there, because people would rather eat than find out what's going on in the country. I mean, if they're starving.
You can say that, but we had a conference last year in South Africa with a number of NGOs from Zimbabwe, and one of them dishes out food aid to people, and the chap was saying whenever he takes food to rural people, these are people who are hungry. The first question they ask him is, "Have you brought me a newspaper?" Well, in Zimbabwe today, the major newspapers are owned by the state, by Mugabe, there are no private radio or TV stations inside the country. Only government is allowed to broadcast. So there's this overbearing government information. There's just too much information from Mugabe's side. So there's need for us to balance the information. They print a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of hate speech. I mean, if you read the Herald today, there is a lot of hate speech in there against the whites, against anybody who doesn't support Mugabe. My name appears there from time to time as an enemy and as a sellout, which in Zimbabwean parlance, if you're labeled a sellout, it means that anybody can take you out. First of all, there was a newspaper article, or several newspaper articles in the Herald for 3 or 4 days, saying that I had committed fraud, I was about to be arrested, and so on, and I didn't take it seriously, and I just laughed. And then on a Thursday morning, I got a phone call from the editor of the paper. I was the managing director. And he said to me, "Wilf, I've just been arrested. And the police have been kind enough to allow me to phone you, to warn you that you are now on our way to your house to pick you up." So they came and picked me up. And eventually I was charged with fraud. We exploited a loophole in the law because the law says that all newspapers must be registered, those that are in the country. And it was silent on newspapers published outside the country. So what we did was we set up a company in South Africa which printed the paper there and then shipped the paper into Zimbabwe as a South African publication. Another thing they did was in 2008, they hijacked one of my trucks, an 18-wheeler, and drove it into the bush, beat up the driver, and set the whole truck on fire, plus 60,000 copies of the newspaper that were in the truck. So I lost my truck, worth over £50,000. I do. I mean, I was born in Zimbabwe, grew up in Zimbabwe. I've got a lot of friends there. I still have a house there. I've got one son there. I've got my brothers, my relatives, my family there. I haven't been able to go back to bury my mother, who died 5 years ago. So, I have a lot of ties with the country, both emotional and, sentimental. If there's going to be a change of government, it must be peaceful change. Then you can develop the country. Then you can talk of reconciliation with those people were, our oppressors yesterday. We can talk of moving forward. But the army has already been making noises about staging a coup if Morgan Tsvangirai should win. Now, we do know that not everybody in the army supports this. So there might be a counter coup. And who knows, another counter coup, and so on. So, it just means bloodshed, is this necessary? I mean, you have to forgive, they see me, they think that I've wronged them. I feel they've wronged me. And there is need for forgiveness, on both sides. It will be time to build our country. I don't believe in an eye for an eye, because all it does is just makes everybody blind. I was in government media. I was editor of the national news agency Ziana in the early 80s, and I used to travel with Mugabe, all over the world as part of his delegation, and we were very good friends. I then also became editor. I was appointed editor of 8 provincial newspapers, which were also government owned, and I was also chief executive of that group. And before I left to found the Daily News, where I was the managing director. And before that, I was a foreign correspondent for 8 years with the August Africa News Service in South Africa. It's been an amazing career, and I feel that I've been privileged. I got a lot out of journalism, and I must put something back into it. Most of them are, on this gravy train, and they're benefiting. The Marange diamonds, for example, which have made some people, incredibly wealthy. The amounts we're talking about, will make your eyes water. There is, for example, the minister in charge of mining, who was a manager on one of the newspapers in Zimbabwe. She was a lowly, paid manager. Today he walks around Bulawayo buying skyscrapers. He's got buildings all over the town. He owns a bank. He owns a race course.
How does this happen?
So exactly, this is all in the last 10 years. How can a man amass such wealth? Such eye-watering wealth in such a short time. This corruption. He's minister in charge of mines. He at least gives the licenses to people to mine. So he takes 10% here, 10% there, and so on. Well, this is the thing. He had us all fooled. Because when you talk to the man, he's very bright, he's very articulate, and he sounds reasonable. He can argue his case. He was reasonable. He was the right man for Zimbabwe. I thought, in the early 80s, certainly. I used to say that. I even wrote about it, saying, how lucky we are to have this man as our president.
What changed?
Corruption, greed, avarice, all those terrible things. And now he's got into a position where, he knows if he loses power, he could end up at The Hague or in a Zimbabwean prison, unless there is some accommodation.